not just the preacher at the church, you're the shepherd. Your congregation isn't just a bunch of nameless faces. They're your neighbors. They're your friends. And I think when you pastor in a smaller church in maybe a rural setting, you go through people's celebrations, their struggles, their losses, their growth, and all of that shapes you as much as it shapes them.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Rural Renewal Podcast. And we are excited to be here. I'm actually really excited to be here for this podcast because, I often, one of the things that I found as we get to interview different people for the podcast is that I often miss out on a lot of the answers in an interview, not because I'm not listening to the person who's talking, but I often miss out a little bit because you're trying to think about how to respond or the next question to ask, things like that. This is a little inside baseball, but in this case, you're going to hear later in the interview. My voice was basically gone the day we were going to interview someone together, and so I didn't participate in it. So I don't usually like to go back and listen to the interview portions of the podcast because it's a little weird to hear yourself talk. I mean, I have done that, but in general, I don't. But today I can listen to this one with you and just hear what Kathleen got to talk about. So, anyways, So welcome to the Rural Renewal Podcast. Kathleen, how are things going?
Things are going well. I think sickness kind of came over our house in the last few weeks, and so kids brought home something. Just when you
thought the winter was done with getting everybody sick, it wasn't terrible, but yeah, we've definitely all had this thing that's been going around. And I know some of you are like winter. It's been spring for 3 months, but if you live in New England, or particularly if you live in Vermont, winter has just barely. We've had about a month of spring now, but it just barely has let go.
Well, yeah, and the morning that we were supposed to do the interview, Chris came home from Bible study, and he was he could barely talk, and I was like, why don't I do this? Because I think it's going to be more distracting than anything, and I don't think that that's going to be helpful for anyone. And he was like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But I think that's life in a rural church is that sometimes we get sick and we have to figure out what we're going to do on Sunday. Thankfully, your voice came back well enough that you could preach on Sunday, but it was definitely not good enough for you to sing. And I wasn't feeling amazing. My voice sounded okay, but I had a really bad sore throat. So our pianist, we were like, can you handle all of worship on Sunday? Because we're just not in a place where we can do that. And she was great.
Yeah, the musical portion of worship, yeah.
And I think that is one of those things that we take for granted in a rural church is that we are forced to be flexible because there's not a lot of us. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously people get sick in larger churches as well. But for instance, music wise, you may have, and we're blessed, right? We have a few different people who can really kind of help out with leading worship in a pretty small church setting. But we certainly don't have a worship band or something like that. Although we've had small little worship teams at times, not currently, but that can lead music, and you're oh, this person was sick, so the other people can kind of help lead vocals or something. So anyway, but I'm sure everybody deals with this on some level, but it can feel impactful in different kinds of ways in a church. And I think one thing we found over the years with this, Kathleen, and we talked about this just a little bit ago before we started today, is that it's important always to that Sunday morning performance is secondary always. And no, that's not that we want to try to we want to try to lead worship and execute the plan for a worship service well, obviously, but it's secondary to pastoral care. And everything's always, of course, secondary to people actually connecting with Jesus, right? That's what we're actually looking for. Mm-hmm. And the desire for good performance can get in the way of that. Not that, again, we should have good, to the extent that we can, good performance is fine, but that it's secondary, very much secondary to these other things. And I think sometimes we have a little more freedom to live that out in a small or rural church. than maybe we do in some other settings. And maybe we don't, right? Like I think in a healthy, larger church setting, hopefully there's freedom to have moments that, just didn't go the way we thought it was going to. And everybody can either chuckle or kind of be like, wow, that was a little weird, and then move on, right? Because it's not a performance. We're not performing.
Well, right. And performance, that word has a lot of connotations to it. And it's not, we know it's not a performance, but at the same time, we want to be able to help lead people into worship and not be a distraction. And so there's that like balance of how we do lead worship in a way that's not going to be distracting. For instance, last Sunday, there's a few things that happened. The person we typically have someone from the congregation open up our worship service, and they do the call to worship, and then they invite everybody to stand for music. And we try to encourage a lot of different people to be up front for that. And the person that was supposed to do it on Sunday, she texted me at 6:30 in the morning and said, "I am really sorry. I have a sick kid. There's no way I can make it." And I wouldn't want my reaction to her saying that to impede my relationship with her pastorally. Yeah. So I was like, oh, absolutely. Totally makes sense. I asked someone else last minute and she was like, absolutely, I'm happy to do it. Or you got the songs that you were playing mixed up and you realized last minute. So then we were switching songs around and people knew that you were switching around because you had to tell the person who was doing our slides. But in general, people aren't too concerned about that. And I love that part of Rural Church, that we can worship together and it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. And of course, I think that even, we've just had these opportunities to kind of like, you can use the moments in that when things don't go according to plan to remind everybody of what we're actually attempting to do when we come together to worship, right? Which is to connect with God, to connect. And I always say one of the things we usually pray before each service is my genuine prayer each Sunday that people who come to our worship service will go away having experienced the living God and having been, and we just trust that if people actually experience the living God, then they will be transformed by that experience. Do I think that means that our worship services are sublime and like amazing? No, but I think that's our prayer, right? Is that it provides, and sometimes the humanity of what you're doing, particularly when it shows up in like funky ways, like you mess up, you can't find the song on your worship stand, which is what happened this Sunday. It was the song we were supposed to sing was there, but I could not locate the sheet music at the time, or whatever. Right? You stumble over a point when you're preaching, or somebody reads the wrong scripture for some reason. You could name the ways that things can go kind of off the rails in a worship service. They've all happened at our church.
Yeah. No. A few months ago, I started preaching, and after my introduction, someone just walked out. It was a visitor, just walked out, and I have no idea why she walked out, and it kind of threw me for a loop, and I tried to like regain my composure, but a few weeks later, someone who she's great, she was like, "Oh, your sermon today was a lot better than the last one." And I was like, "Oh, I can tell you exactly what happened. I got thrown off." And they're not concerned about like, I eventually caught up and I was fine. But I think that we have this, and we want to do well. Like that's the goal, because we don't want to be a distraction for people worshiping God. But at the same time, I think that realness really speaks volumes in our day-to-day life. Yeah.
And it's part of, I think, the people's tolerance for it, and maybe even our internal tolerance for it, hopefully is much higher in our settings, because it's just a reality that we're there to help people encounter God, to encounter God ourselves in worship, to connect with Jesus, to experience the transforming power of the Holy Spirit. But we're not there to put on a good show. And I don't think nobody goes into worship thinking they're there to put on a good show. But I think the pressure to do that is a little bit is less sometimes in our settings. And that's something, sometimes we should appreciate the things that we don't have pressures that people in different ministry settings maybe do. And so that's, I think, a place, hopefully you don't feel too much. I mean, I think most of the pressure you would feel in this regard is always internal anyways. And so to the extent you feel it, I think we all have to kind of try to pray that God will help reassure us in those moments that the Holy Spirit continues to work, and because of course the Holy Spirit continues to work. But anyway, there was one particular time you talked about how one good example recently that happened with somebody who was going to come and do the call, like the opening part of our church service, and it didn't happen, and it opened up a pastoral opportunity for you. Can you I know I don't want to share all the details, but can you give a little, because I think it's helpful understanding
So
this.
I had asked her to do it, and she said she was really excited to do it, and then she didn't show up, and she didn't send me a message, which was unusual. I wouldn't have expected that from her. And so a couple of days later, I gave it a little bit of time. I said, "Hey, just checking in, is everything okay? Because I noticed that you weren't there on Sunday." And she was like, "I'm so sorry." She's like, "I was driving to church and I almost got in an accident, and I just was like, I can't do this." And she's like, "I just drove home." And I was like, "Oh, absolutely." And so I think, that the bigger goal is that she feels cared for, and not that she missed a Sunday where she had an obligation, because we have enough people that we can, fill in last minute, and it's totally fine. There's no one that gets upset about that. But I think the bigger thing is that I wanted to make sure that she was okay in that kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder of making sure that we keep perspective and what we're actually trying to accomplish as a church congregation in those regards, right? Ultimately, what we're up to is helping people connect with Jesus and to feel like they are as part of a community who wants them to connect with Jesus and who cares about them as a fellow person trying to connect with Jesus. So,
yeah. And I remember probably it was 6 or 7 years ago, we had some visitors from a bigger church, and probably 300 to 500. I'm not sure exactly how many people are at that church, but one of the pastors of the church was in our worship service, and we had a child from the childcare. So our sanctuary, behind the pulpit, there's 2 doors, and then one of those doors leads to down a hallway to where we have our childcare during the second half of the service. And a kid got out of the nursery and ran on in the front of the sanctuary during the worship service. And afterwards he was like, "That would never happen in my church." But he said it in a way, he was like, "But I think it's awesome that no one, it doesn't matter to anyone. No one cares that happened." And so sometimes it was a good reminder to me that sometimes these moments are beautiful, even for someone who's used to a more polished worship service than ours, is oh no, this is great that people feel comfortable, and no one gets upset, or no one is worried about, they're worried about making sure that the kid is where he's supposed to be. But I love that part of our church, and I think that we can lean into those kinds of moments.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to tell us a little bit about the interview you did, Kathleen? Because I want to listen to it, but I want to hear why I should listen to it.
Oh, for sure. So I spoke with Sam Peters, and he just, I think it's been released. If it hasn't, it's going to be released really soon. There was a few different dates he gave me, so I'm not absolutely sure. By the time you listen to this, it's probably been released. But he just finished a book called The Heart of a Small Town Pastor. And I loved this book. It was so good. I would say it's in my top 5 rural ministry books. It's very unique. I haven't read a book quite like this before, but it's a story. It's a fictional story of a well-seasoned pastor doing some shepherding, some mentoring to a brand new pastor in a rural setting. And each chapter kind of addresses different things, different issues that might come up in a small town. And I loved the book. So I was really excited to be able to talk to Sam about his book. It was really encouraging, especially for sticking through it for the long haul, that the benefits of doing that. And if you've listened to this podcast for, more than one or two episodes, you probably know that Chris and I are very much a proponent of staying for the long haul if possible. We've seen the benefits in our own context.
Great. Well, I'm excited. That's what better kind of conversation would I like to listen to than to listen to someone who really has a passion for kind of passing on what they've grown to know with like the next generation of leadership. And so, yeah, really excited to hear the interview.
Hi, Sam. We're so grateful to have you on the podcast today. I would love to hear a little bit about yourself, your past, what you're doing now, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, Kathleen, thanks for having me on. Appreciate getting to know you and Chris, and actually looking forward to, kind of furthering this conversation as you guys have a heart for small churches as I do. But I've spent most of my life in ministry, more than 4 decades. As a pastor in smaller church settings, and always bivocational. And over those years, I've really come to love the unique calling and challenges that come when you lead a small town or rural congregation. It's very unique and very special to me. I think there's just something deeply personal about it, because you're not just the preacher at the church. You're the shepherd in every sense of the word of that. Your congregation isn't just a bunch of nameless faces. They're your neighbors. They're your friends. In fact, my wife and I joke all the time, a trip to the grocery store counts as a pastoral visit, And I think when you pastor in a smaller church and maybe a rural setting, you go through people's celebrations, their struggles, their losses, their growth, and all of that shapes you as much as it shapes them. And so as I look back on ministry over the last 4 decades, I realized that I was blessed to have a lot of great mentors early on, people who invested in me, poured into me, helped me navigate those early years of ministry. I mean, my first church, I was 22 years old and had 12 people, and just what do you do with that? And they were all much older than me, of course. But then I also saw a lot of pastors who didn't have that. And they were trying to figure it out on their own, and often doing that in isolation. And they paid a pretty heavy price for that. And so I think that's really where the heart of this book comes from. I wanted to create something that just felt like you were sitting down at the table with a seasoned pastor, someone that didn't just give instruction, but offered you wisdom and encouragement from a real life perspective. And that's really why I wrote the book in a story-driven format as opposed to a how-to. I wanted it to be something someone would read and say, I can relate to that. And I feel like Pastor Sam was just sitting here telling me what to do, and just try to help these pastors grow into ministry by investing into them. And then also I wanted to encourage the pastors that have been around a while, guys like me who have that experience, to encourage them to become a mentor, find somebody that you can take under your wing and teach them some of the lessons maybe they haven't learned yet in a loving and caring way. So I think that's a little bit about me and a little bit about the book and why I wrote it and where my heart's at anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And we'll put the book in the show notes, but Sam, what's the title of it again?
The book is called The Heart of a Small Town Pastor.
Okay.
And I felt like that title reflected both pastors in the book. So that's where it came from.
I love that. I think that's great. So we're going to chat all about this book today. And by the way, I really appreciated this book and the format. I think it really speaks well to a mentoring relationship or someone who's just getting into small town ministry that might have come from a bigger setting and doesn't understand quite what it's like to be a pastor in a small town. You talked about how the calling of a rural pastor, that it's a calling that requires you to know your people deeply and love them just the way they are. It's not glamorous work, but it's holy work. Now, as pastors, we often want to change people on our own terms or change things in the church in our own way. How can we slow ourselves down?
That's a great question. Here's what I've learned, and I tried to put this in the book. We need to listen longer. Stop believing you have all the answers because you probably don't. When I was young and fresh out of seminary, I thought I had all the answers. I'd been trained, and I thought I knew, and I knew nothing. So several chapters in the book deal with Pastor Stephen learning this lesson, learning to listen and learning to walk with, not ahead of his congregation. Because I think there's a mutuality that comes into play when you lead a small church, a little different than being in a larger church where maybe a pastor in some ways is seen more as a figurehead or as a leader. There's some anonymity that's between them and the congregation, but that's not so in the smaller church. And I think for a younger pastor, learning that this mutuality, walking with people, is going to help them understand that there's a lot of wisdom sitting out there in the pews, and they need to tap into that. Okay, if you think about, I'm thinking about my last church. The average age of my last church was 86. That was the average age. So, and I didn't look at that as negative. I looked at it as, look at this treasure of wisdom that I have out there. And I just need, and over the years, I've just learned just to listen longer, ask great questions and lean into them. And it really helped me slow down and to change at the pace that the church needed to change, not my pace, but the pace the church needed to change.
I love that. And I think that, especially first pastor, like we have all this energy and excitement and I think that's a good thing. We just have to be able to figure out where to use that energy.
Got to balance that out a little bit.
Yeah. So it's a learning experience, but I think you talk about the mentoring process and you talk about cross-generational mentoring. And my husband and I were so grateful in seminary, we did an internship, or they called it mentored ministry, at a church it was in a small city. But our pastor was so good at walking through just the day-to-day life of being a pastor. And he was closer to retirement at that point. I think he had a few more years before he retired, but the church went through some really hard times, and he was very open with us about it. And the church was really open. And if we hadn't had that, it would have been a lot harder going into the pastorate. So I am a big fan of that. And you talk about that being one of the most overlooked tools for spiritual formation and ministry longevity. How do we encourage those relationships?
Well, as I just mentioned, I think one of the things you have to do if you're a younger pastor is acknowledge that there's a treasure trove all around you of wisdom. People that have already walked the journey of faith, they've learned a few things in the process. As you just mentioned, they know the town, they know the hurts the church has been through, all those kinds of things. And if you're a more seasoned pastor, you need to take the initiative to mentor others. Now, I think a lot of pastors miss this. we kind of mature, we got 10, 20, 30 years in ministry, and we're in a groove. We know what we're doing, but we forget there's other people who don't. And one of the lessons that was taught to me a long time ago by the late Stan Toller, he was a protege of John Maxwell, if you don't know who that is, but Stan Toller is a great author and leader. He and I were having a conversation one day, and he said, he asked me, it was a gut punch, I'm going to tell you. He said, who are you training as your next leader right now? I don't have anyone right now. He said, then you're not a leader. He said, leaders are always training the next leaders. And so that was a wake-up call for me. This was several years ago. And what I did is from that, I formed a mentoring triad, and I've kind of continued that on. And a mentoring triad was nothing more than me and two other men meeting together at different stages and spiritual maturity levels. And we would meet together once a month, and we would start with prayer and a single question. Where have you seen God at work in your life this past month? And we would just share our hearts and mentor one another and encourage one another and pray for one another. And that, what that meant for me, Kathleen, was I had to be intentional about that. It really wasn't going to be an organic thing. I had to be intentional about being a mentor. So I prayed about who would God want me to connect with and mentor right now, and who could pour something back into me. And so I think it has to be intentional if we're going to do cross-generational mentoring. It's just not going to happen by accident. That the generations won't seek one another out typically. It takes a little nudging.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think in our case, it was, I don't want to say forced upon us, but it was part of our seminary experience. So like, if we hadn't done that, I mean, we had some previous pastors who were like informally mentoring, but this was way more intentional in forming us as pastors. And I think that's really, and having his wisdom was really helpful. And especially in the first few years, we would still call him and that kind of thing. And we saw him a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we email back and forth about stuff. And I think it's just nice knowing that someone's in your corner, someone's praying for you, even if you don't talk all the time. You know that you're not in the pastoring role alone, and I think that's really helpful as well.
Well, I think when I was in my 20s, I'm going to say I was probably 25, 26 years old. And I got asked to preach a revival, a youth revival. I was a young preacher, so they had me preach a youth revival. And man, I just preached my heart out. And after the service, the pastor of the church, he was 80 years old. J.O. Shepherd was his name. He pulled me aside and he said, "Son, you preach like a house of fire. Let me teach you how to be a pastor." And in many ways, he was I think to me, the embodiment of what Preacher Bill is in the book. Some of his mannerisms and the way he taught me things. But man, I just thank God for his willingness to pour into me and invest in me so that I could learn some of those hard lessons without learning them the hard way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that is so true. So you talked about the willingness to stay in a church when it's hard, and talking about being respected when you stay through the hard things. And I found the same to be true. But what do we do when ministry gets hard?
Well, Kathleen, that's a tough one for all of us in ministry, isn't it? Staying when it's hard.
Yeah.
The story that I share in chapter 2, and that you allude to with this question, comes from an event in my own life when I thought about quitting. I changed the setting, the story just slightly, but the card that I mentioned in that chapter actually sits on my desk. It's about 10 feet from me right now. It sits on my desk. And as I wrote the chapter, I found myself writing through tears as I thought about how God works in my life and the life of any pastor who says yes to the calling of pastor. And in fact, my wife walked into my office as I was writing that chapter. She says, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I just had to revisit something." So I'm okay. But, and also, one of the other things I think that helped me when ministry gets hard is I was part of a clergy cluster for more than 15 years. And those pastors, we all got to know one another and support one another. But those pastors were there when I needed someone just to hold my arms up, or when I needed a confidant I could vent to. And it was helpful. And I would say, if anybody listening to your podcast or watching this, if you are ministering in isolation, you absolutely must stop that. You have got to find yourself a mentor, a colleague, a ministry group that you can meet with regularly. Because when we minister in isolation, it takes a toll on our spiritual and our physical lives. No pastor should ever pastor in isolation. It's just too hard to do by yourself. And it's another reason why I wrote the book, to encourage pastors to help one another. I remember several years ago, I got sent to do a church plant in Dunedin, Florida. And I'd never done a church plant. And they gave me absolutely zero preparation to go do a church plant. They said, "You're a great preacher, go." And after 2 years of doing absolutely everything, driving the church bus, leading the singing, doing the teaching, doing the preaching, I was just totally burnt out. And I did all of that in isolation. They didn't have anything set up to kind of check on me. I mean, maybe once a month they might call me and say, "How's it going?" Of course, I said, "Great, it's going great." But it wasn't going great. And finally, I went golfing. A pastor colleague of mine invited me to go golfing. And I think we were on the third or fourth tee box. And he said, "How's the church going?" And I just broke down in tears. And I said, "I can't take it anymore." And he said, "I'm going to fix this for you." And so he called my sending church, and he sent another pastor to take over. And I went to his church as an associate pastor to heal. Because I 2 years in isolation, I couldn't do it anymore. So if anybody's listening to this, if you're trying to be a Lone Ranger, stop.
Yes. Oh, for sure. I think that sometimes as pastors, there's this feeling like, oh, I have to have all the answers. I have to have it all figured out. And especially with other colleagues, it's hard to be vulnerable and say, I don't have it all figured out. But I need someone to figure this out with. That's really hard. But it's so worth it. We have some friends that we get together with pretty frequently, and we've walked through some hard things together, and we have a lot of fun together. It's not all serious. I think that's important too, is to have fun outside of the church. I mean, I love my church family. I think they're great. But there's some things you have to be careful about, some of the things that you do or say, or you need to be able to relax and have people that are safe to relax with. And I mean that in a really healthy way, not because I think you don't want to have this persona in your church that you're somebody you're not. But I think it's just a different kind of relationship. I listened to a podcast maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it had nothing to do with ministry. But she was talking about how she's like, I don't consider having a best friend. She's like, I have friends for different parts of my life. And I have my mom friends. I have, and that really helped me understand some of my relationships. It's okay if, this friendship is mostly about this one thing. And I think knowing that, I think is really healthy and makes us not feel like just a pastor all the time, because I think that's important, that balance.
Yeah, I think, if you're in ministry, it can be a lonely place. Mm-hmm. Your congregation isn't going to, right away invite you to all their barbecues and everything else, because funny story, I was asked to leave a wedding that I officiated once.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the father of the bride, after about a half an hour into the reception, came over and said, "Pastor, when are you leaving?" I said, "What? Excuse me?" He said, "We want to open the bar." And I said, "Let me fix this." And I walked over, grabbed the beer off the bar, opened it, said, "Can I toast the bride and groom?" And then I left. But it can be a lonely place, and having colleagues and good friends, even if it's friends in different settings, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. For sure. You talk about ministry pie. Can you tell us what that is and how it can help pastors?
I have, I have shared this with so many people over the years, and they've told me, because beyond ministry, this pie illustration works. And people have said, "Man, you just saved my life," or "You saved my career with that advice." But the ministry pie is all about finding balance in your life. If we're not careful, ministry will devour every piece of pie you have, and you'll have nothing left for those that matter most. So I used alliteration in the book to keep the ministry pie memorable. So I've got ministry, marriage, and margin. Usually when I teach it, I don't use those three things, but I wanted to put something in the book that really clicked with people. But basically, I call it the parable of the pie. And the illustration is this: every day God gives us an awesome pie. And the awesome pie is our time, it's our objectives, it's the opportunities that we have. And if we go through our day and we serve all of our pie to people and things that don't appreciate the pie, could care less if you gave them any pie, or aren't thankful if you gave them some pie, we quickly find ourselves out of pie for those people and those things that matter the most. The key here is and what we have to learn, it's our choice of how we serve the pie. So we need to make the most of the pie that we're given. Every day we get a brand new one, but you get to choose who you serve pie to and what you serve pie to. So for people in ministry, finding balance is difficult for a new pastor because they think they have to do it all, as you mentioned earlier. I've got to do it all. I've got to know everything. I've got to do everything. I've got to be everything for everybody. And those pressures of trying to be everything for everybody just destroy you. They destroy your ministry. They destroy your life. And, you don't have to listen very hard to hear about another, moral failure of a pastor. When you don't have all that balance, that ministry pie where it needs to be, you're going to get hurt somewhere. It's going to happen. And sadly, too many times it's their family and their own soul that pays the price of ignoring that ministry pie. You've got to have, and that's again gets back to the accountability. You've got to have people. You got to have people to call you on it. And I've had people, some of my colleagues have called me on it before. So. The old practice what you preach, preacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that recognizing that there's seasons that one piece might be a little bit bigger is okay if it's for a season and everybody's on board with that, right? But when it becomes every day, and it just keeps going and going and going, your family's gonna feel that, or your soul's going to feel that after a while, and that can get really unhealthy. If
you find yourself constantly asking or saying, when this next season is over, I'm going to I'm going to take that Sabbath, or we're going to spend some time. If you find yourself constantly saying that, you got a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we all have colleagues in our lives that say that, and it's easy for you to notice them saying it. It's a little bit harder for us to say it about ourselves.
It is.
But this is why we need to have colleagues and friends who will call us out when we need to take a break. You have a whole chapter that's called The Volunteer Drought. I love that chapter title. I think that's we all know what you're talking about as soon as we read it. How do we balance fresh ideas with figuring out what's feasible in our context?
Well, first of all, we need to listen to the word. In Proverbs 15, it says, without counsel, plans fail. With many advisors, they succeed. God never intended for us to make big decisions alone. He surrounds us with a lot of wise voices, and we need to listen to those voices. So I think if we're wanting to get volunteers on board, there's a few things we have to do, and I'll share an example with you here in a minute. But if we want to get them on board with fresh ideas, we have to think of this. Maybe you as a pastor, God has given you a vision for something, and you've prayed on it, and you've molded it, and you shaped it, and you maybe even fasted over it, and you spent weeks or even months trying to get your arms around this thing, and finally you've got it all figured out, and you present it to the church, and in 5 minutes you want them to come to the same conclusion you just spent months getting to. Not going to happen. You've got to give them the same kind of respect, I guess, to let them digest it. And so the story I wanted to share is I had a mentor tell me this one time, and it so totally worked. He said, whenever you have a great plan, you take it to your church and you say, I don't want us to make a decision on this today. Just throwing something out there God's laid on my heart. I want you all just to pray about it. And next month we'll talk more about it. And you throw it out there, whatever it is. And then you come back the next month and you say, well, have y'all been praying about it? What questions do you have? I don't really want to take a vote on it yet. Just keep praying about it. And then by the time you get around to 90 days of doing this, someone is going to say, I thought we already decided to do that.
Yeah.
So I tried that for a big decision we were making, and it worked. By the time we got to 90 days, they're like, well, Pastor, we already decided we're going to do that. So what are we waiting on? Let's go ahead. I'm like, okay. Because now it became their idea. I gave them time to think it through. And usually when we go through that, what we're going to find is that, and this is kind of what I was trying to get to in the book, and hopefully it came across well, is when we do a cattle call for volunteers to do something, you're not going to get much response. People need to know how they uniquely fit in whatever vision it is you're painting for them. Okay. And so going to someone personally and saying, I've got this idea. In this case, it was for youth ministry. And I just know that anytime I talk about youth, your eyes light up. Tell me what you think, and listen to them and hear them. Because I think when I'm jumping all over the place here. God has uniquely knit our churches, our individual churches together for a specific reason. And I call that their one excellent mission. What is the one thing God has created your church to be in your community where you are planted that you do better than anybody else? And that's the one thing you should focus on. And so when we figure out what that is and we get people on board with that, what we're going to find is we're now playing to their strengths. Instead of being voluntold to do a ministry, they're volunteering for the ministry because it's something they're passionate about. And more times than not, it's greater than any vision you had as the pastor. Mm-hmm. Because they will take their own gifts, their own abilities, and they will run with it. And you can pretty much, at that point, you are just a supporter, you're a permission giver, and you let them go.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think we are, when we have an idea, we just want to run with it. But that's small town church doesn't run that way, and so I think you get less frustrated if you recognize that, that it's not like that they don't like your idea. It's not that they're, against you. It's that it takes time for us to think about it and pray about it. And I think that's good. I don't think we should jump into things just because. And I think, we've tried stuff at our church and do it for a season and then it doesn't work for us anymore. And being able to let it go too, I think is important. Not just doing it because you've always done it that way, right? And our church did church suppers for years and years and years. And before we arrived, they had already decided this is not for us. We're kind of done with this. We're burned out. And we're like, absolutely. And now, there's conversations about doing some sort of meal, and we keep on being like, but they're not going to be church suppers. Like if we do something as a meal, it's not a church supper. And so, I think that you're right that we don't want to push things faster than they should go. And I like the 90-day thing. That's helpful to think about.
Yeah, it really does work. As I coach churches, I had this one excellent mission initiative that I do with churches. I'm getting ready to do one up in Ohio here soon. But one of the things that I find amusing to me and refreshing to them is that when I give them permission to stop doing something, and they're like, we can quit having the bean dinner? Yes. Oh, hallelujah. But refocus that attention to something they're passionate about. Some of those things were great ministries and they had a season. Mm-hmm. But if the season is over, celebrate.
Yeah, for sure. So you talk about you don't lead people by pushing them. You lead them by walking with them. Can you give us some strategies for having the patience to do this?
I think as a pastor, it can be a little nerve-wracking when you want your congregation to get on board, again, as we just talked, with something God has given you a vision for, and they're just not there yet. But we need to understand that it's a journey for them too. And we don't know really how they're thinking about it until we've walked with them for a while. So I want you to think about people in your congregation, especially the difficult ones. Okay. And we all have them. I call them EGRs, extra grace required. You want to help them with this transformation to be more like Christ. But when you try to push them, it only makes them dig their heels in deeper. And I my analogy here is when you look at them, you see the locomotive heading straight for you. What you don't see, but need to see, is all of the cars that locomotive's pulling and what's in those cars, because it's all of those things that have shaped who they are as a person. And until we've walked with them a while, learned their experiences, their upbringing, their setbacks, their struggles, we can't really lead them. And in fact, that locomotive will probably run you over if you don't learn those lessons. So if we take the time to walk with them for a while, and we ask great questions, and we listen longer, then we learn what's in their heart. And I just over the years, there's been so many folks where that's been exactly where I needed to meet them. I needed to listen a little better. I needed to take the time to sit down with them and learn and ask great questions like, well, that's an interesting perspective. Where's that come from? How'd you learn that? Because oftentimes there's a reason why they're digging their heels in. And once you figure that out, you can help lead them a little bit better, I think. Takes some patience.
It does take some patience, for sure. You talked about the concept of pastoring the town, not just the church. And I'm curious to know, how do we do that without getting burned out?
Oh, yeah. Again, first of all, it goes back to the ministry pie. I think we have to learn how to do that. But the second thing, I think we need to learn as pastors, and I've seen so many pastors completely blow this over the years. We need to build relationships outside our church. How can we truly know the felt needs of our community if we never interact with them? We have our pastor's office, and we put in our week, and we see the same people on every Sunday and every church board meeting, but we don't really have a lot of interactions with people who don't go to our church or who are neighbors or in our community. And so what I would encourage folks to do, just as you live out daily life, you go to the hardware store or the barbershop or the coffee shop or to the park, strike up conversations with people, learn to be a friend to others. invite somebody new to a cookout at your house. And so to keep from getting burned out, just do it as make it part of your everyday life. It's not anything, you're not adding anything to it. You're just being more aware of new people and getting them in your circle so that you can talk to them. And one of the interesting things for me is as I have practiced that over the years, some of these people, and I'm thinking of a couple in their 70s at the time, as I'm telling you this, I just befriended them. And we just found out we had a common interest in antique cars. And so we would talk about that. And I went to a car show and they were there. They were sitting with a bunch of friends. And they introduced me as their pastor. They didn't go to my church, but I became their pastor. Now, they eventually did come to my church. And I was able to lead both of them to Jesus. So, but it's a long game. And I think pastors need to get out of their office more, and they need to practice what I call relational evangelism. It's a long game, but it's befriending people that maybe they distrust the institution or religion. Maybe, they've got some church hurt they're trying to get over. But, go fishing with somebody new. I mean, just do something that gets you into a circle of other people to build relationships. And that's how we begin to pass. And this is especially true, Kathleen, when you're in a small town or a rural setting. You're not one of them until you're like that.
Yeah, and I think for some of us, it's easier than other people. And we've found over the years that volunteering and actually signing up to volunteer is a really powerful way to make that happen. We have a local elementary school. It's K-8. We've had kids in the local elementary school for 11 years. We got another, we've got a while to go. But we've developed relationships with a lot of the teachers and the administration. And we're at the point where they trust us. If something is going on in the school and they need extra support, they trust that we'll come in and provide it without, throwing Jesus in their face. That they know that we genuinely care. And I feel like that we've been able to create a bridge between the school and the church in an appropriate way, not in a forceful way. But one day we were coming home from school, and my husband and I were talking about how, after our kids finish at the school, we're going to have to be more intentional, whether it's volunteering or substituting or, whatever the thing is, we're going to have to be more, because it's easy now because we have to, I've been to the school 2 or 3 times this week already, so it's easy to be with people. But when, if you don't volunteer or sign yourself up to do things, it can get hard and isolating. You just think about church world and you don't think about outside. And I know that some churches, thankfully our church is not like that, but I know some churches, their expectation is that you're the pastor of the church and not the town. And so there's some education there, office hours, sometimes my office hours are not in the office. So trying to encourage that. Encouraging, but sometimes that takes time and education and showing that it's helpful to all that time and effort you put into doing other things is actually really fruitful and really can make a big impact in your community. Because I want my community to flourish, and so I need to be a part of that. And is it always easy? No, but I think it's helpful.
No, I think that is great. Getting involved in the school or some group in your town, particularly in a small town, that's how you begin to be seen as the pastor of the town. People see you, they know you, and again, you don't have to put Jesus in their face, but they know you're a pastor. They know you follow Christ. But they're going to watch your heart first and see how you behave. It's not easy for me to meet new people. It's easier now than it used to be. But and people find that surprising. Oh, you're an extrovert. No, not really. If I'm at a party, I'm the guy that stands in the corner. I don't, So So I was forcing myself to learn this habit of meeting new people. And so I had this little thing. Our kids were little at the time. So I did this little exercise and I had my kids hold me accountable. And so I put 10 pennies in my left pocket. And at the end of the night, I had to make sure all 10 pennies were moved to the right pocket. And I could only move a penny from one side to the other if I met somebody new and got their name. And my kids, I remember going to a gas station and I went in and paid for the gas, came back in, and one of my sons called me on it. Did you get his name? I said, no. He said, go back. So I was like, now I'm caught. I've got to do this because I taught my kids to do. So I had to go back in and say, by the way, my name is. But a little exercise, it forced me to learn to know people's names and meet new people.
For sure. And I think being willing to, we're just so used to like serving others. And I think that's a really good thing. And we also have to be ready to be served as well. We had a really tough day and I was going to meet some friends for breakfast. And last minute I was like, sorry, I'm not going to make it. And, one of them reached out to me like individually and said, is everything okay? And I was like, it's been a rough day. And she was like, can I go get you a breakfast sandwich? And I mean, my husband could, Chris could make food. It wasn't like we needed food, but I was like, yes, absolutely. And so she went and got a breakfast sandwich and I think a few other things. And it wasn't huge, but I knew that it was meaningful for her. And so sometimes I have to say yes. I don't have to be the one that, stays strong all the time. I can let people in inappropriate ways. So this has been a great conversation. I have one more question for you. So you talked about how your marriage deserves more than leftovers, and you spend a whole chapter talking about that. Now, what's your advice? Like, how do you help other pastors keep family a priority, not just marriage, but family in general? And I want you to give us really practical tips because sometimes the stuff up there isn't helpful for us.
Right. I almost had my wife write that chapter. A lot of the lessons that I've learned, I've probably learned from her.
Okay.
And that's because we've learned to communicate well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's one of the tips I think you need to take into. But I think probably one of the key things if you're in ministry that you have to do, and I wrote about this in the book, you need to have a date night. Some people say, you need to have a date night once a month. Nope, once a week. You need to have time that's carved out. This is part of that ministry pod, but it's carved out and it's sacred time. It's a time for you and your spouse to get together. And we just had a couple of rules. Okay. We had a certain day. It was always the same day, always the same time. And the rules were for 30 minutes, we can talk about our family, the church, and work. And then those are off limits.
Okay.
And it forced us to go from level 1 communication to level 5, deeper conversation with one another, talking about our dreams again and our aspirations. Where do we want to go in life and what's our future look like? And, you do a lot of that when you're first dating, you first get married, and then you just get into this rut where you don't communicate anymore. Everything's level 1, you just give each other a high five at the door as you're going in and out in the morning. That's it. See you tonight. I'm out. Peace. It can't work. We have to have better communication. So having a date night to do that, I think, is key. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Sometimes it was just us, going to a movie or even just sitting around watching TV in our bedroom without the kids bugging us, But you just have to have that time away where it's just the two of you. And then on the communication side, and I think this is so true because men and women, generally speaking, I hate to stereotype, but generally speaking, communicate differently. If you've ever read 5 Love Languages, you know what I'm talking about. but learning how to ask good questions. Like my wife is very blunt. She'll tell me exactly what she's thinking. That doesn't mean I know exactly what she means. Sometimes I have to ask clarifying questions. So, honey, what I'm hearing you say is da 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 da. What would you like me to do with that information? So, because a lot of times she'll share something with me. By nature, I'm a fixer. Something's broke, I want to fix it. And she'll come to me with a problem, and I used to jump in and immediately want to fix it. She said, I didn't ask you to fix it. I just wanted you to hear me. Oh, okay. So now I ask it, what would you like me to do about that? Would you like me to fix that, or have you got it? And by the same token, she's learned that I can't multitask very well. I have to be very compartmentalized. And she calls it in a box. I get in certain boxes. I'm in my sermon box, or I'm in my video box, or I'm in whatever box I'm in. And if she comes in to tell me something and she can see that I'm intently doing something, she says, oh, you're in your box right now. And I'm like, yep, give me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And I will be completely on board with you. And so I'll get to a good stopping spot, and I'm going to say, you have my undivided attention. Talk. And so we had to learn to communicate better. And it kept us from having a lot of blow-ups and other issues where I wasn't listening properly and, understanding. I always wonder, it's like, why does my wife start every conversation with, you never listen to me? So yeah, I just had to listen better, ask better questions, make sure I understood what she was trying to tell me. So I think in ministry, and it's you and Chris have a unique relationship. Not sure. Every pastor have both of us, in ministry together. But oftentimes there's expectations from the church onto the spouse. In my case, everyone's looking at my wife being, oh, you're the pastor's wife. So you know the Bible inside and out. You know how to raise every child. You know how to, and she's like, nope. and she's not a wallflower. She wants to roll up her sleeves and be involved in ministry, and she always has been. She's been a great help. But she says, if you're looking for the Bible scholar to lead the women's Bible study, don't ask me. So.
Yeah. So
I think helping your church understand that. In fact, funny story about the date night thing, going back to that real quick. I got 3 phone calls from my congregation on a date night one night. And we were on our date. And by the third one, I was kind of fed up with it. And so I told the guy, I said, John, I don't mean to be rude, but this is the 3rd call I've gotten tonight about this problem at the church. And I'm on a date with my wife. Every Tuesday night's date night for us. So I promise you, I will call you tomorrow and take care of this. But right now I'm on a date with my wife. He got up Sunday morning and gave a testimony to the church and said, do not call our pastor on Tuesday night. It's his date night.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And we want to support him in that. So please don't call him on Tuesdays. I'm like, so yeah, it became, again, a sacred time for the two of us, and worked out great.
Oh, that's great. I was going to say, I just recently read the book, The Art of Asking Better Questions by J.R. Briggs. And that has made me think about, it's not about specifically about marriage, but it has made me think about the questions I'm asking people and being a lot more intentional about the questions and how I'm asking them. I was even talking to Chris yesterday. There's someone that in my life that just has had some hard things, and I'm like, how do I ask her questions that gets the joy, like the good stuff out of her, and not just the hard things out of her? Because I think I want her to recognize some of those things as well. So anyway, if you're looking for a book on questions, that's my second book encouragement for you today.
Yeah, it's a great book. John Maxwell has a similar, I think it's Great Leaders Ask Great Questions.
Okay.
He has a similar book. Again, we'll learn more if we ask a good question and then take time to listen.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful for you, Sam, for this interview, but also even more so for your book. And I appreciate how you are serving the church. I think it's really a good thing when we can help build up the body.
Well, it's great to hear that, and I'm humbled by the responses I'm getting on the book. I've written a lot of books. This was my first book of fiction, even though there's a lot of truth in it. Storytelling hasn't always been the way I try to teach lessons, but hopefully this will be a blessing to a lot of pastors and even congregations, because I want them to maybe get a peek behind the curtain of how difficult it is in ministry life, and maybe support their pastor a little bit better.
Rural Renewal Podcast is brought to you by Fresh Expressions and the Ascent Movement. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in places we eat, live, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. The mission of the Ascent Movement is to create a thriving, collaborative connection for the church to live out the Great Commission in today's context. One of the initiatives of the movement is the Mustard Seed Initiative. Inspired by the message in the parable of the mustard seed, the Mustard Seed Initiative seeks to empower small churches across North America, enabling them to grow in faith and impact within their communities.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com. Rural Renewal Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbowen and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Jeanette Statz. Our senior director is Shannon Kaiser. A special thank you to Brad and Joni Perry of Alabaster Grace for the use of their music for our podcast.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
May God be merciful and bless us. May his face smile with favor on us. May your ways be known throughout the earth, your saving power among people everywhere. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Let the whole world sing for joy because you govern the nations with justice and guide the people of the whole world. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Then the earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. Yes, God will bless us, and people all over the world will fear him. Psalm 67.